But let me give you 3 questions to consider, to which I'll speak to. The first question is, why do we measure? The second question, these are background questions for you. I'm not necessarily going to answer these, except perhaps the third question. How can we measure more effectively, where effective is defined according to the utility of our measures and the technical standards of those measurements? And thirdly, what is it about resilience measurement that is different? And indeed, I do think it's something different. Is Simon connected? Okay, I really can say some nasty things then. He is not completely, he is not wrong, entirely wrong, but he's wrong on a number of counts. He's not completely right. He's in that middle ground, which is a very interesting place to be. And I won't promise to straighten it out here in 12 minutes, and perhaps over the course of the day will help you understand. So in some ways, it's very interesting that he was the first presentation, introducing a certain level of skepticism in speaking about this. I do think it is a distinctive entity, or rather construct, to look at, and it requires a specific set of measurement efforts. So let me begin with the next slide. Thank you. And what I'm speaking to is what's called the high level. It's not high in any kind of lofty sense. It's high in that it's meant to be general and broadly applicable across a range of contexts, settings, programs, and countries. So the measurement question, which is very practical, is this. What data needs to be collected from what populations using what tools at what points in time to answer what types of policy and practice questions are vital in there. Apologies for leaving that out. So that's kind of the broad question that we're trying to satisfy. There is a set of very practical activities that need to be outlined in the measurement world. For those of you who are engaged directly in M&E, you're well aware of this. Okay, the next slide, please. So the presentation I'd like to make here, and in just probably remaining 9 minutes, is talk about the objectives of the Resilience Measurement Technical Working Group. I'm here, while as an academic, I'm here primarily as a representative of the Resilience Measurement Technical Working Group, which is an effort that is coordinated by FAO, WFP, and IFPRI, and it's funded by the European Union and USAID. So I'll speak a little bit about that. I'll talk about the definition of resilience that we've accepted within that group, talk about our accomplishments to date, planned activities, and then in particular focused on capacities. And I think this is one of the distinctive elements, something that Simon, I think, spoke to briefly, but we speak to very directly in our work, looking at the particular set of capacities that allows people, households and communities, to respond to shocks in ways that ensures their well-being over time. Okay, so thank you. So the Resilience Measurement Technical Working Group, our overall goal is to advance the technical rigor and practical utility of resilience measurement. Our specific goal is the specification of a common analytical framework and guidelines for food, nutrition, security, resilience measurement. We're looking toward the adoption of agreed principles and best practices in data collection, analysis, tools, and methods, and the implementation of action-oriented research at country regional levels. That second bullet, by the way, is really important. We are advocates for 2 things. One is for standardization, and 2 is for context-sensitive measurement. We have to be able to speak a common language. Otherwise, 5 years from now, or maybe sooner, funders, donors, and the larger development community, by and large, as a group, will say, "What have you accomplished?" And we'll only be able to speak as individuals, or as individual NGOs, or as individual researchers. I believe in context sensitivity, but we also argue for some degree of standardization. Something we're contemplating is the idea of a minimum common core data set for resilience measurement. So next slide, thank you. So the main achievements to date, I'll speak organizationally, operationally, and substantively. Organizationally, we have assembled ourselves through FAO, WFP, and IFPRI as a group of 20, an expert panel on resilience measurement. A few of them are in the room here. John Kurtz, Tim Frankenberger, Dan Maxwell. Where is Eugenie? And Eugenie Radio also. Is there anyone else from the measurement? Oh, I'm sorry, behind me. Yes. And our most vital member, who I usually say for last, is Chris Benet. So we have organized, we had our first face-to-face meeting in October, a second one just this past Monday, whether actually Tuesday and Wednesday, as a run-up to the IFPRI meeting itself. Let me speak, though, substantively what we've created and what we hope to create. We have produced a resilience measurement principles guide, and we will produce 2 additional documents. The next one, as I mentioned before, is a common analytical framework, which doesn't so much speak to resilience, what the resilience indicators need to be, but the set of issues you need to consider when identifying those indicators. So let me focus on this, because the very foundation of measurement is a clear definition. If you go down to I think it's that one, thank you, is the accepted definition of resilience. And how we've defined resilience in the technical working group is this way. Resilience is the capacity that ensures adverse stressors and shocks do not have long-lasting adverse development consequences. There's some really important elements in that definition. The first one is capacity. The second is that it must be linked to a particular outcome, and that it focuses very much attention, a great deal of attention on shocks and stressors. So if you can go on to the next slide. Thank you. We have 10 measurement principles. These will be a dizzying array of a lot, so I won't, just you can click all the way down through the animation. And I put them there just to let you know that we've done a lot of work and put a lot of thought into it, but to read them off, it would be far more time than we have available. The few that I'd like to focus on here, I'll actually focus just on one, because I think it's one of the things that distinguishes resilience measurement from other forms of measurement, is the multiple scales and multi-level interactions, thinking about households, community to higher levels. In our small group discussion here, we talked about, there was one comment that talked about how we have a lot of high-level measures that are giving macro information, and then we have micro measures, but the two don't speak to each other. One of the distinctive features of resilience measures is we're looking at individuals within households, within communities, and it's not just a matter of disaggregating variables and indicators to figure that out, but we look for the interaction across those levels. The other aspect I'd like to emphasize is the rates of change. If you look at what happens to someone after a shock and trying to make a judgment on their well-being, it depends very much at the point at which you look at where they are. They may have sold off productive assets, and they look pretty good at that point. If you look at them in a longer period, you find out they may have descended. So the rates of change and the time scale is a really important part of resilience measurement. To counter part of what Simon had to say, the two distinctive features I think about resilience are what we measure and how we measure it. And that's part of the how we measure it, I think, feature. Next slide. So for a moment to focus on capacities, and then I'll complete by saying a little more about what I think are the distinctive features of resilience measurement, building out this what we measure and how we measure, is really thinking deeply about capacities and thinking about how those capacities allow people, households, and communities to respond to shocks over time to ensure their well-being over time. And a lot of the work that Mercy Corps is doing, and Tim and others in the room, I'm sure, are looking at those capacities with specific reference to shocks and specific reference to certain kinds of outcomes. That's the part that needs to be unpacked. This is not business as usual. We're looking at capacities with reference to shocks, and by the way, stressors is important. Someone in my group, one of the comments was that, we have to think about not just this as a humanitarian aid problem, but development problem as well, which means we're focused on the cumulative effect of chronic stressors as well, and looking at the interaction between those two, and they're not separate. The next slide does is it takes these capacities as, by the way, not the comprehensive list, but as a sample of capacities that one needs to look at, and it provides a number of sample indicators associated with each one of those capacities. The other thing it does is it asks the question, if you have a sample set of capacities that you're looking at, social, human, economic, how are they deployed, for lack of a better word? How are those deployed to ensure absorptive, adaptive, and transformative capacity? So there's this interaction between the shocks, the capacities, and the kind of well-being that's ensured over time. For me, don't worry about it. I'll finish without the slides. Thank you. So let me just conclude by saying this: if we ask the question, what is measured? How does resilience cause us to look at what is measured differently? I'll focus on two elements here. One, it requires a much closer look at shocks and stressors. We can't rely on retrospective accounts where we say, if we're interested in precision, and we should be, we always are in measurement. We can't rely on retrospective accounts that say, in the last year, what hit you? And then say, in the last year, did you use, what certain coping strategies did you use? We need to close that gap. We need to use things like perhaps cell phone-based technologies or more frequent assessment to enhance the precision of those measures. The other element that's included that's really important, that does distinguish resilience from other types of approaches to measurement, is it brings in the ecological element and thinking about agroecological factors. A lot of this, one of the drivers of resilience measurement is climate change. And we have to pay much closer attention to that. That should be an area we measure across all programs, all countries. To speak about how, I'll mention three elements. One, the timing of our measurements. If anyone's seen a good movie recently, a good film, imagine reducing the film to 3 still photographs. Could you do that? Probably not. Right. Now, we can't have a film, but we do need more continuous measurement. In fact, that's all a film is, a series of stills in rapid form. But the reduction of human well-being in the face of shocks over time simply to a baseline, midline, and end line that typically are put in place because they comply with the funding cycle just is not going to work. We need a better solution to that if we really want to get at this. The other part of what's measured, those are the two elements I like to measure in the interest of time: shocks and stressors and the inclusion of ecological. As for the how, I'll give you three things to think about. One I just mentioned. The first is timing. The second is the levels of measurement. I mentioned that earlier in the talk. And think about how they relate, not just as discrete units where you can disaggregate data, but think about dependencies between across these different levels. And the third element is thinking about cycles. This is a very dominant aspect of the work in ecology. Think about the cyclical nature of shocks and also systems as well as another vital feature. Think about things in a systemic framework. So add on another one. So was the yellow card? Was that the dire warning? I've forgotten when the darts get thrown. Okay, thank you. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. A lot of comments and contributions as regards resilience being context specific. So the first question, I think, is standardization versus keeping measures to a specific context.
So the question is standardization versus context specific. Yeah. So there's the one kind of large answer to this, and is a broad answer, is that, and I only emphasize this at the end in a way I should have began my comments, is that the importance of modeling things, whatever you're studying, with reference to a system. And if you're doing that, the context part is rolled in a very central way. It's often the case when we talk about measurements or we talk about our programs, we say it depends on context. And then the discussion doesn't go anywhere from there because your context is different than my context. But what we do need, and here's the middle ground, and perhaps a compromise is the wrong word, I think it is the solution, is we need a uniform way perhaps of talking about context.